Hello everyone and welcome to the Quantpedia Explains Trading Strategies video series. Today we will explore the topic of active share measure as a predictor.
Hello everyone, my name is Radovan Vojtko, I'm CEO and Head of Research at Quantpedia. Today we will discuss fund picking strategy, we will discuss how we can evaluate individual funds, how to find funds that make sense to buy, and how to definitely not use some indicators for fund picking or to solve the task how to pick the fund. Fund picking strategies are strategies that are interested into how to evaluate and how to measure the performance of the mutual funds or hedge funds are also the part of the Quantpedia database. They are not significant part of the database, around 2%, but it is one of the tasks that's usually in the hands of the portfolio managers who are managing the fund of funds, also who are trying to buy multiple funds and build the portfolios from the funds or ETFs. One of the measures that's very popular in this space is the active share. So what is the active share measure and can we use it as a predictor? This is the question that we asked ourselves and we wrote an article about it. So the first question is, what is the active share? The active share in financial literature is the method how to determine the extent of the active management that's employed by mutual fund managers. And the active share tracks the disparity between the portfolio manager's holdings and that of the holdings of the benchmark index. It's stated in the percentage terms. For example, you have some number of stocks in the benchmark and you differ from the benchmark by 30%. So it means that your active share is about 30%. So you are quite an active manager. If you are index-based fund, your holdings in your portfolio differs from the index by 1%. You are index tracking fund. As we can see, the active share shows how the manager of the fund is active. So if you want to have the outperformance against the benchmark, you need to have holdings that are different from the benchmark. So you need to have the high active share to beat the benchmark, but it doesn't mean that when you have the active share you actually will beat the benchmark. So high active share is the necessary to beat the benchmark, but it is not the predictor, even that from time to time it's very often used as a predictor. It is not the predictor, and our article is about that. Once again, it's expressed as a percentage and it can range from 0%, and when you have a fund which is fully overlapped with the benchmark, to 100%, and in this case the fund is completely different from the benchmark. From this analysis we use the data about 22 active share funds. We use the data from active share info, which was the web page from Martin Kremers, who wrote a very interesting research piece called Active Share and Predictability of the Performance of the Separate Accounts. So if you are interested in this kind of the problem, I really recommend you to read the paper. The Mr. Kremers and his team, they performed the analysis of the active share from the cross-sectional basis, so they used a lot of the funds and they ran the analysis. Our sample is a little smaller, so we do not use so many funds, but we use a smaller sample of the funds, but we go deeper in our analysis, you will see. So we downloaded data, and what we tried first to do is we try to find the funds that are highly active. But when you have a fund that is highly active, it doesn't mean that it's correctly stated, so the active share is correctly stated, because let's imagine that you are a portfolio manager and you are buying the value stocks, but of course some value benchmark or some value index is better for you as a benchmark, but you selectively select that you do not want to benchmark yourself against the value benchmark, but you want to benchmark yourself against the S&P 500. So you have completely different investment universe, so you can buy small value stocks in your fund, but when you are telling to your clients that your benchmark is S&P 500, you have a high active share. But here is the question, so does your performance comes from the stock picking ability? So are you a good stock picker? No, in this case you simply picked the wrong benchmark, so you selected the benchmark that's not correct for your fund. And if you have outperformance or underperformance, all of the outperformance underperformance is because you have the completely different style from the benchmark that you selected. So you are not buying the large cap growth stocks, which is S&P 500, but you are buying the small value stocks. So in this case, you have high active share, but you have the wrong benchmark. This kind of the situation happens very, very often. So very often the managers select the benchmark like S&P 500, but in their case they should find a different benchmark. So what we realized is that this situation happens often, so we split our sample into two parts. The first part, those are the funds that have the high active share, but they incorrectly selected S&P 500 benchmark, because the benchmark should be something different based on the portfolio that those funds have. In the second sample or second half of the sample, we have the funds that correctly selected S&P 500 benchmark, so that's the benchmark that's correct for them. They have a high active share, so they have the different different weightings of the stocks, but the stocks are from the S&P 500 investment universe. That's like very important part. And then we downloaded the data. We started in 2019. Our sample ends in 2023, so we have 4 years of data, but it's enough of the data for this kind of analysis. So, and then we run the main analysis. So firstly, we were interested to see what is the average alpha of the funds that incorrectly stated the benchmark. I mean, in their case, the average alpha is the negative. And then we wanted to see what is the average alpha of the funds that correctly pick the benchmark. So yeah, they select the stocks from S&P 500 investment universe, and they have the benchmark S&P 500. And in this case, the average alpha is also the negative. I mean, the alpha for first group and also for the second group is the negative. This shows that it's very hard to systematically harvest the alpha. It's not surprising. It's very hard when you are in a mutual fund space and you are in a mutual fund to beat index fund. I mean, usually the hedge funds have the better performance, but nevertheless, this is how does it look like. So the question is, or the question for us was, what is the source of that, and if it has something to do with active share, can we use the active share to distinguish which funds perform better or no, etc., etc. So for stuff like that, we run the decomposition of each fund portfolio. So how does it work? We conducted an alpha analysis. The alpha analysis is a new or quite new report, plus or minus 12 months old, that we have in Quantpedia. What is the alpha analysis doing is that it takes the outperformance or underperformance of the fund against the benchmark. So it takes the alpha, then we run the factor analysis of that alpha, and it reveals the sources of the portfolio performance or outperformance. So you can separate the market-driven factors from the true unexplainable alpha. So that's what we did. So we took the performance of all of the funds, and on each of the funds we ran the alpha analysis, and we were interested to see if that outperformance, or in our case underperformance, is driven by systematic factors or if it's driven by idiosyncratic stock picking abilities of individual managers. And here are the results. So first example. So here we have a chart that illustrates synthetic alpha in comparison with the average real and residual alphas for one of the funds. So here we can see how does it look like. The alpha, outperformance, underperformance of the one individual fund is the blue line. The synthetic alpha is the alpha that can be explained by individual factors like, I don't know, value, small cap versus large cap, value versus growth, momentum factors, etc., etc. And the yellow one is the residual alpha. So that's the alpha that's unexplainable. What is the chart showing us? So in the first 2 years, all of the underperformance of the fund could be explained by the synthetic alpha, so by factor bets of the portfolio manager in this fund. And afterward, after 2 or 3 years, the residual alpha, which is the yellow one line, was explaining the real alpha more. So it means the manager started to pick individual stocks and he was not very good at it. So at the end, the fund underperformed by about 30%, and half of that was because of the synthetic alpha. So it means because of the systematic factors, and how that was because the residual alpha or because of the stock picking bets by the manager, so by idiosyncratic bets. That didn't pay off. So this is how does it look like. What we can do is that we can even dig deeper. So we can take a look how are those residual alpha and synthetic alpha divided. Here you can see that the main contributor to underperformance was the residual alpha, which is the yellow one, then the bets in the financial sectors, and probably the manager was underweight the US equities. So yeah, the manager was running the mutual fund, which he was buying the US equities, but he was probably underweight the US equities. The fund didn't have enough exposure to US equities and therefore underperformed the benchmark. So this is individual fund. And then we ran this analysis on the group of the funds that correctly and incorrectly selected the benchmark. So we ran this analysis on 2 different groups of the funds, and we were interested to see what is the difference. And here we can see a significant difference. So in the first case, we have the alpha, which is the blue line, the residual alpha, which is basically the alpha by idiosyncratic stock picking skill of the managers, and the synthetic alpha, which is basically the outperformance, underperformance because of the systematic factors that the fund is exposed to. So here we can see that in the case of the managers that had the high active share, so they were very active, but they stated that they are picking the S&P 500 as a benchmark, but in reality they bought the stocks from, I don't know, small cap value universe or something like that. Most of their performance was explainable by those synthetic bets, so by that synthetic alpha, and the residual alpha, so the stock picking ability, was not important for the performance of the fund at all. So those funds were not stock pickers. They simply bought the small cap value or, I don't know, different kind of the stocks, by they set themselves the benchmark S&P 500, and they underperformed the S&P 500 because, I mean, their factors were wrong. So they invested into the stocks from, I mean, completely different investment universe. In the second case, so in the case of the managers that selected their benchmark S&P 500, actually bought the stocks from S&P 500, they just gave the different weights to the stocks, so they try to be the active stock picker. In their case, the synthetic alpha is close to the zero, and all of the underperformance can be explained by the residual alpha. So it means, yeah, those investment measures, they were highly active, but their performance was not very positive because they didn't pick the stocks well. I mean, yeah, they underperformed. They had the high active share measure and they picked the benchmark correctly, but still it didn't help them. And then we can take a look deeper into that. So, I mean, if you run the factor analysis of the fund's performance against the benchmark, you can, I mean, take a look what are the exact sectors that are causing the underperformance or outperformance of the fund. Once again, we can see that in the case of the funds that were trying to pick the stocks, so they selected the correct benchmark, they were highly active, they had a high active share, but they were trying to be the stock pickers. We can see that the yellow line, so which shows the residual alpha, negatively contributes to the performance. Their factor exposure is plus or minus zero, just the individual stock picking abilities are not very good. On the other hand, individual stock picking abilities are not important. I mean, in this case, for the first group of managers that were buying, I don't know, the small cap stocks, what is the most important is their factor exposures. They had a very high active share, but the active share was caused because they incorrectly picked the benchmark. What's our conclusion? So the relationship between the active share measure and alpha is more complex than it may seem at the first glance. What is very often the problem is that the managers often choose the benchmarks that are not entirely accurate, and this leads to the skewed information from the active share. So we cannot use the active share at all as a predictor of the performance or outperformance or underperformance, because I mean the managers can select their benchmark as they want, and some of the managers, they like to select the wrong benchmark, so they are not buying the stocks from the benchmark. They have a completely different portfolio than the benchmark has, and I mean they have the high active share, but in this case the managers over or underperformance is driven by systematic factors, so the large cap, small cap, value, growth, momentum, or sector factors, and not by individual stock picking skill. So, I mean, in this case, it's highly questionable if it makes sense to buy those funds, because you can buy that factor very cheaply by investing in the ETF or in the index fund. What we are interested to see is we want to analyze the managers that pick the accurate benchmark for their funds. So it means that alpha of the fund is driven by stock picking skill. But in this case, it also doesn't mean that high active share should automatically translate into the fund's outperformance. So what does it mean? Yeah, the high active share is a very popular measure, but it doesn't predict anything. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense to use it in your, I don't know, fund picking at all. I mean, it's just the information for you that, yeah, this is the active manager, but I mean, the activity of the manager can be coming from two sources. So one source can be that the manager is trying to select different weights of the stocks than there are in the benchmark. He's trying to be the good stock picker. And in other case, yeah, the manager is trying to hide that he's buying the small cap stocks, and he's stating that, yeah, his benchmark is the S&P 500, but in this case it's not accurate benchmark. The insight that we can gain from the active share is in this case highly distorted. So I mean, to really gain more meaningful insights into the manager's performance and why they have the outperformance or underperformance compared to the benchmark, it is really more effective to conduct a factor analysis of the alpha. So this is what I showed you here. We need to dig deeper. We cannot use just the active share. We need to do the factor analysis of the alpha, and in this case we can identify what are the causes of the performance or underperformance. So we cannot rely solely on the simple measure of active share. That's the final conclusion of our analysis. So yeah, do not use the active share. It doesn't make sense. It will not give you any added value. If you would like to know something about how the measure performs, yeah, take your time, do the factor analysis of the alpha. You will gain more knowledge than, I mean, just one number. What is the activity of the manager? What is the active share of the manager? So, thank you very much. I hope that you liked this article. It was a little different than all of the others that we had before. So, it was not a lot about the trading. It was about the analysis of the fund's performance, etc., etc. But, I mean, this is very interesting for all of the people who are actually buying third-party funds. So, if you are a wealth manager, if you are a portfolio manager who is managing the fund of fund, really take a look at the factor analysis. You will learn a lot. And do not rely on, I don't know, simple measure like active share, right? Some morning stars and stuff like that. So thank you very much. I hope that you will join me in the next video, and have a nice day.
Are you interested? Then pick another video to learn more, or subscribe to Quantpedia Pro and try how our analytics and reporting significantly save time spent on quantitative research.